Greetings, great ones, and we came here to make one. Welcome back, welcome forward to Soul Power Tennis. Welcome back, welcome forward to Soul Power Tennis. All right. Let's get some audio stuff taken care of real quick. Please make sure you like, subscribe, share, click the notification bell. Interesting. Struggle streaming just a little bit. Check, check, check. And check. All right. So I think we're good to go. Think we're good to go. Thank you all for your patience. Please make sure you like, subscribe, share, click the notification bell so you can be made aware of when it is I'm going live. It has been a little bit since I went live previously. I was on such a high after doing an incredible interview with Miss Celissa, who was an Arthur Ashe ball girl back in the day. Yeah. I went for a deep dive and finally made my way back to things, you know? So, once again, welcome to Soul Power Tennis. Soul Power Tennis. I am Akmo Sari. This is a channel, a platform that in general is dedicated towards putting a different spin on our approach to the game of tennis with, our particular insight on how we may see things. So that's the general, that's the macro. And the micro, specifically, we are here to acknowledge and celebrate and edify the contributions of foundational Black Americans to the sport, to the game of tennis. And keep that relevant, keep that consistent, and keep it funky. Just trying to get the, it's been a while since I've, like I said, since I've had this set up. I've been spending a lot of time on my other channel. That would be the Compliment King channel. And the show in particular would be Compliment Cosmos. And I actually already have a third channel that's called Osmosis the Composters. And I'm in the process of building that up as well. So please make sure you like, subscribe, share, click the notification bell to all 3 of those channels. Just trying to make sure that my 2 balls are in the shot or in the picture. We're good. Yeah, gotta keep it balanced. My setup for my other broadcast is a bit different. So I'm just getting reacclimated. So I thank you for your patience. And Wishfully, you all are enjoying the music that's playing in the background. Who's the music by is now on the screen right now. It is now on the screen right now. All right, and please make sure that keep your head in the game and let's maintain. All right. So with this particular broadcast, we're doing a few things differently and we're doing a few things the same. What might that be? May you ask? Well, let's do it like this. How do you like that? Ooh, can you handle two of me? Let's do it like that. That might be a bit better. Okay. And as we do the broadcast, feel free to leave a comment in the chat, ask a question, be a part of the conversation. You know, the channel is still newer and we're still growing things. And we got a long way to go, but we are on our way. And yeah. So as you saw in the title, African Open Tennis Championships. African Open Tennis Championships. Why is it called that? Well, I've been watching tennis for decades. 3 decades to be exact, the better part. And I've seen players playing, participating in the professional sport and game of tennis from all over the world, from all different kinds of nationalities, countries, places of origin. And it's been beautiful. It's been profound. It's been magnificent. It's known that tennis is the second most diverse sport on planet Earth. What does that mean? That means that country-wise, the participation in the sport of tennis has more participation from any other country, more than any other sport, except for what's called soccer or football outside of the USA. Tennis is my favorite individual sport. And so I've seen a lot of different players. I've seen a lot of things. One thing I haven't seen is someone of direct African descent who is ranked high, either in their country or the world. We've seen people from Europe. We've seen people from Asia. We've seen people from South America. We've seen people from Australia. We've seen people from the United States. Is there a place or a landmass that I'm forgetting? Australia, Asia, Europe, South America, North America. What, Antarctica? No, not Antarctica. They're also left out as it stands now. But the population isn't very strong or it's not a high population there. So out of the 7 continents that has a good amount of human beings on it, Africa is the only continent, which is the biggest continent on Earth, that does not have a player in the top 100, ranked in the top 100 in the world. There's no, from what I read earlier, I did a little bit of research, And with this particular broadcast, we're not going to get into the hard research of things. That's not what we're going to do. We're not going to do that this broadcast in particular. We're just going to talk about some general things and dream up a little bit. From what I read earlier, there's no African man representing an African country that is ranked in the top 500 in the world. And there's only one woman who's ranked in the top 500 in the world who is of direct African descent representing their nation. Who is that? You may find out in a future episode. Now, Soul Power Tennis very much focuses in on the foundational Black American contribution to the sport of tennis. Foundational Black Americans are a very specific lineage and ethnic group that we focus in on here. Previously may have been identified as African American. Foundational Black American is the new proper term to go by. Those who have been here for hundreds of years, of African descent and or of dark indigenous descent or ancestry on this land. However, Africa is the motherland. It is the cradle of civilization. It is where the first humans, Homo sapiens sapiens, came from, originated from. This is where the first human beings were. Then evolve into full human beings somewhere else. First human beings came out of Africa. First original civilizations came out of Africa. So that is the root. Now, this is an idea. This is a concept. This is a train of thought that I've had now for the better part of, I want to say, 5 to 7 years. Of someday I would like to see the African Open Tennis Championships be an actual thing. Now, at the present moment, you have the top 5 women's tennis players in the world. The tennis players in the world presently. Number 5 is a woman from Greece, if I'm correct. Number 4 is a foundational Black American woman, Coco Gauff. Number 3 is a person of Caucasian descent from the USA, who's number 3. Number 1 is a woman from Poland, who's dominating the game right now, if I'm correct. And number 2 is a woman who she represents Africa in a way. Ons Jabeur. Now she represents 2 things. She represents Africa, as she has said, and as the media is putting forth. The first African woman to do this, the first African woman to do that. However, there's some clear distinctions. Kudos to that, but there needs to be some clear distinctions that are addressed and made. She represents North Africa. Unfortunately, or fortunately, however you look at it, there's a difference between North Africa and what's called Sub Saharan Africa. I'm not fond of the, sub part, but is the African countries and nations that are below, in terms of geographically on a map, that are below the Saharan desert. So that would be the nations below Egypt and Tunisia, Morocco, places like that. And so Ons Jabeur doesn't represent what they call Black Africa. She represents Northern Africa. And she also represents, as she has said out of her own mouth, and as the media has expressed as well, she also represents the Middle East, or the Arab nations, because that's where her ancestry comes from. And many of the people who are in the North African countries are of mixed ancestry, mixed ethnicity. In some ways, you can say mixed race. A lot of them are Arabs, Middle Easterners that came over further east into Africa. In some ways, depending upon who they are and which nation, they had invaded Northern Africa, Egypt being one of the main places. Now, obviously, you have migrations and you have invasions. This is not meant to be a pure history lesson, so we're not going to get too deep on that front. But moving forward, you also have the migrations from Europeans, Italy, Spain, nations that are a bit closer, even Turkey, that is a mix, coming into Northern Africa. And you had some other nations as well, but we'll just keep it there. So Ans Jabir represents Africa in that way, but specifically Northern Africa, and she represents the Arab nations. However, for this conversation, we want to focus in on, and we want to acknowledge and thank Ans Jabir for any work that she is doing as being a self-identified African woman to bring the game of tennis to more people, more places on the continent of Africa. It has to start somewhere. So whether it's Eastern, South, West, or Northern Africa, I think that it is a step forward in the game expanding into other parts of the world. And for this conversation and for this particular channel, for the game expanding into Africa. So Northern Africa at this point appears to be the newer gateway. However, there was a time where South Africa was the gateway for tennis, even going back to colonial times. We're talking late 1800s into the early 1900s. You had some tournaments, being played in South Africa. You even had the great Arthur Ashe play a tournament in South Africa to bring awareness during the apartheid era and regime back in 1973. The great Arthur Ashe played a tournament there. Whether it was an exhibition or not, it doesn't matter. Pro exhibition is bringing awareness. And so the expansion into Africa has already happened. However, for certain reasons, it got postponed, it got put to the back burner, or it just stopped almost altogether. And so now what's happening in 2022, in the 2020s, by way of Ans Jabir success, you have that being reintroduced. And so we're thankful for that, and we want to acknowledge her work and the work that her team is doing. So it's not best to negate that. So let's acknowledge her for that good work. All right? And, with that, again, for this particular conversation, though, we want to focus in on what's called and classified as Black Africa, Sub Saharan Africa, and why there hasn't been a professional tennis tournament that has taken place there. Now, obviously, you've had some exhibitions take place, I think maybe about 3 to 5 years ago. There was an exhibition that was put on, by the great Roger Federer and the great Rafael Nadal and Bill Gates. It was a fundraiser of the sort, and that took place a few years ago, and it was extremely successful. And so we're thankful for that. That was awesome. We want to see more of that. We want to see more of that. And I think that that was proof that there is interest. There is the opportunity there for the participation, the expansion into Africa. Why not? And again, if you're joining, please make sure you like, subscribe, share, click the notification bell. So we want to keep the conversation directly on Black Africa, Sub Saharan Africa. And we're going to get into the who, what, where, when, how, and why of it all. All right? And again, if you're joining, please make sure you feel free to leave a comment, ask a question, be a part of the conversation. So it's not just me talking. And while we transition into the next part, let's hear a little music. Let's turn it up. All right, so getting right back into things. Right back into things. Let's do this real quick. So, as the description reads, how am I coming in? I have to consistently check my sounds until there's plenty of people in the chat to make me aware of if they can hear me or not. This is what we have to do. But we'll get there someday. I see people popping in and out. Don't be afraid. Don't be shy. Welcome. Stay. For some, the topic might be a bit heavier and weighty, but it's not that we're not able to handle it. Let's put our big people undergarments on and address it. So if we get into the description of this broadcast, as it says, African Open Tennis Championships, could the African Open Tennis Championships tournament be a reality someday? Although there are very few amount of professional tennis tournaments that are played on the continent of Africa, almost none are played in Sub Saharan Africa, Black Africa presently. Why is that? Let's explore and dream up the possibilities. Can we do that? I think we can do that. This is Soul Power Tennis. Yes. So, now, as it's been said, as it is known, tennis is one of the most expensive sports to participate in, especially if you're taking it seriously and you want to be a professional. The cost of equipment, the cost of training, if you have a team around you, the cost of paying them and the cost of travel is very, very heavy in comparison to a sport like football or hockey or basketball. For the most part, those other sports, they're team sports. And so you might have a team doctor. You might have a team coach. In tennis, each individual player, for the most part, has their own physio, their own coach, their own support staff, their own tennis rackets, whereas other teams, other sports, that basketball, that football is shared. So that expense can be very, very challenging to maintain. So I think a lot of parents who don't come from wealth or have that wealth, they steer clear of getting involved in tennis. And they'll go more towards a team sport or an individual sport that is not as expensive. So that's one of the main reasons in general, the macro, as to, why tennis is a very selective sport in that way. Now, obviously, if you're less off financially, you're less likely to take on the finances of the sport of tennis, as I just mentioned. And if we're keeping it real, 100%, we know that as a continent, although Africa as a continent is the wealthiest continent on earth in terms of the resources alone, the mass of the continent, it being the largest, the number of people, the resources that are there, it's a gold mine, literally. So Africa is the richest continent, or one of the richest continents on earth. Unquestionable about that. However, for some reason, the people, the mass of people, are the poorest in comparison to other continents. Why is that? That's not coincidence. That's not by mistake. This is Soul Power Tennis. We get into it here. That particular point is a conversation for another day. Bringing it back to center, the people there, per capita, per country, have less financial resources in order to be able to afford the game of tennis, either to play it or maybe in mass to go to tournaments. Now, that second point in terms of can the people of Africa en masse be able to afford to go to tennis tournaments? Absolutely. If you build it, they will come. It depends on how much you charge. It depends on the infrastructure that is around that tournament. I think so. Now, why are we even having this conversation? Why is this topic matter important? Why? Well, if we're speaking from a place where we're saying we want this planet and our world to be more inclusive of all kinds of people from all walks of life, to have agency in their life, to be able to be treated as full-on human beings, to move out and about in the world. It appears that in mass, people are in action around balancing out the planet and giving a voice to the voiceless and giving agency to those who have been excluded and left out. This has been a process over the previous hundreds of years, definitely within the previous 70 years. So it's really about inclusion. Inclusion. Include all kinds of people. Include all nations. Make it accessible. Level the playing field. Make it even. Another point, the talent is out there. It doesn't matter what continent you go to. There's plenty of untapped talent that is available, ready and able to be tapped into. Now, Africa has essentially 1 billion people or close to it. Just over, just under, let's just say 1 billion for this conversation. Now we know how well all kinds of people on planet Earth can do in sports when trained appropriately, when given access to the right equipment and facilities. We know how well they can be, how well they can perform. Without getting too deep and without getting too controversial, we know that some of the best athletes in the world come from African descent or direct African descent, African ancestry. There is a dominating factor that is there. And so if we're talking about the African continent, there's so much untapped potential and talent that is there. Talented athletes. Now, obviously, Africa is the cradle of civilization, of humanity, human beings, science, mathematics, culture, education, exploration, travel, so on and so forth, infrastructure. But as it pertains to sports, we know that there's plenty of talent that is lying right there. So be inclusive, tap into the talent, and from a pure business standpoint, it's a new market. It's a new market opportunity for you to expand into. If you're a tennis organization, association, corporation, Africa is a new market, uncharted territory. Not to use colonial terms, but the new frontier. So much opportunity, so much growth there. Now, because we're talking about sport and sports and athletics, we'd be remiss if we didn't touch on competition. 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 If you're the best, prove you're the best. If you're the best nation, prove you're the best nation. If you're the best in the world, prove it. How do you prove that? You prove that by the level of competition. So the larger the pool of competition, the better the player is who rises to the top of that. But because the continent of Africa presently, it appears, is excluded or left out of that conversation and not included and not tapped into, not giving the access to resources, to competition, there's a semi-asterisk that is there for the game of tennis. I said it. Whereas in other sports, in boxing, which is a sport, but it's more than a sport because you don't play at boxing. That's a different conversation. Basketball, soccer, or football, as some call it, Africa is included. Now, Africa is not included in all sports, but overall, Africa has its place. But for tennis to be as diverse as it is, I think it is not cool, and it is lacking that it has not been more inclusive of African nations and countries and the continent of Africa to be included in the competition pool. And wishfully, this conversation, this broadcast is a part of changing that, is a part of shifting that. This is what we do at Soul Power Tennis. We put a different spin, a different perspective on the game of tennis while focusing in on the contributions of the darker shade of people, foundational Black Americans in particular. Now, you have some people who are ranked in the top 20. Even, let's do this real quick. Thank you for your patience. Please make sure you like, subscribe, share. Let's check something real quick. So, let me see something. Where's the top ranked men's American? Top ranked American men's tennis player. Let's see. Let's just check something real quick. Yeah. So, one of the top ranked American tennis players, men's, is a Black man of direct African descent. His name is Francis Tiafoe. I would be remiss if I didn't mention him. All right. His ancestry, if I'm correct, comes from Sierra Leone. However, he was born and raised in America. So he represents and plays for America. So I'm just doing some research in real time. So he's like a middle ground, player, because he doesn't play for Africa. He doesn't on paper represent an African nation, but he represents his African nation in essence, in energy. But he plays and represents America. So we gotta give a shout out to Francis Tiafoe, Big Foe, and being that bridge and that merging agent of a player to bring Africa and America together in that way. And even what he did at the U.S. Open, you know, so many Africans were proud of him. And so many Americans were proud of him. You know? So I think that his success as of late is a spark. A spark. You know? And in moving things forward of bringing Africa closer to having tennis, or bringing tennis to Africa. We have another player, Felix Auger-Aliassime. Now, he is somebody of mixed race, but his father is of African descent and his mother is of French-Canadian descent. And he plays for Canada. So I mentioned the men's. For the women, I mentioned Ons Jabeur. And we'll just keep it at that. Only because we're focusing in on top 20. You know? And Francis Tiafoe is presently ranked number 17 in the world, so he's top 20. And as the nickname goes, you know, FAA, Felix is ranked number 9 in the world. So they're top players, you know. But again, although they have that African connection, they don't play for African countries. But getting back into the conversation, why it's important: inclusion, talent, a new market and growth, and competition. Sports is about competition. Let the cream rise to the top. Let's see who's the best. Because tennis is also a team sport in certain instances. There's doubles, mixed doubles, nations play against nations, Team World versus Team Europe. You know, all of that. Now, the next part, if there were to be an African Open Tennis Championships, be it a Grand Slam caliber event or a Masters 1000 series or part of the series, or be it a 500 tour level event or even a 250. Maybe there's a challenger event that is in Africa. At the present moment, I'm not aware of that. But if we're talking about professional tennis tournament of note, of significance, it presently doesn't exist. So if you're in the chat, I'm asking the question, which nation, which country do you think, leave it in the comment section, you know, as you watch this video. Which nation is a good nation, a good country in Africa to potentially host the African Open Tennis Championships? Where do you think is a good country for it to be in? Either to start in or, just to be in. What's a good nation? Well, I have a few that I would like to posit. To start, South Africa. It's where it used to be anyway. So take it back to where it used to be many, many decades ago. Over 100 years ago. Take it back there. Take it back there. Why not? That's one place. I have another place. How about Zimbabwe? The economy is doing fairly well, if I'm correct, as far as I know, in comparison to other nations. Another nation, maybe Egypt. Now, Egypt is Northern Africa, in contrast to the two previous countries that I've mentioned, which was Sub Saharan Africa, which is, Northern Egypt is where Ans Jabeur is from. I'm sorry, Northern Africa is where Ans Jabeur is from. She's from Tunisia. The reason why I say Egypt is because, Egypt, ancient Egypt, Kemet, as it has been known, is a prominent civilization. A prominent civilization was once there. So take it to the pyramids. So we have Zimbabwe, we have South Africa, we have Egypt as a potentiality. How about Ghana? Not doing too bad in comparison to a lot of other African nations. How about Nigeria? I think Nigeria has the most people in it, country and nation-wise, than any other country or nation in Africa. Definitely amongst the top. Why not Nigeria? Now, maybe it's, because there's political turmoil in certain nations, or there could be an outbreak of some kind of disease or something going on in that nation. How about Ethiopia? A tennis tournament in Addis Ababa wouldn't be bad. You have the United Nations that are located in Addis Ababa. You got Geneva, you got the US, and you got Addis Ababa, the UN. So that makes it safe on some level politically. So it's a bit stable in terms of outbreak of diseases from mosquitoes or something like that. It's a bit safer. Now, the water definitely is an issue. When I was there previously, about 7 years ago or so. So the water situation needs to be fixed, but that can be fixed. But politically, it's doing pretty well in comparison to other nations. It's a bit more stable. Addis Ababa has it all. So I say try it out there. These are just some African nations that I'm presenting in terms of where it could be. So we spoke about the why. We spoke about the where. Now when? Maybe 2024. Why 2024? Well, the Olympics are happening in 2024. The Olympics is an international sporting event for 2 to 4 weeks that literally every continent is able to view or watch or listen to and in some way partake in. It is the most international sporting event ever, the Olympics. So I think that using that as an opportunity to expand the sport of tennis, to highlight the beauty and the brilliance that is the game of tennis, and to highlight the beauty and the brilliance of Africa and the African people and merge those worlds would be a great opportunity. So I think that having another exhibition, bare minimum, with some top players in Africa would be amazing in 2024. Pre-Olympics, during the Olympics, less likely, or after the Olympics, right after. It's possible. So 2024, bring some tennis to Africa, at least as an exhibition, and just see how it goes. So we got the why, we got the where, we got the when. How? Of the game's greatest can come together and partner with one of the world's most richest human beings and men, controversial figure I call them, but if they can all come together and bring an exhibition to Africa, why can't it happen again? All it takes is one. All it takes is one prominent figure in the game of tennis, men or women, women or men, or maybe both, to put on what it is I'm presenting in Africa. See where it goes. You got 2 years to do it. 1.5 years to 2 years. Doesn't matter if it's a person of European descent, Hispanic or Latino descent, Asian descent, African descent, American descent, doesn't matter. I'm not concerned. Bring the game of tennis to Africa, to more people, expand. Where, when, how, why? Which person remains to be seen. So that is what I posit as Akmo Sari. That is what we are positing as Soul Power Tennis. We don't want to hear any excuses on, oh, well, there's this challenge in Africa and there's that challenge in Africa. I don't want to tap into the conversation of racism. But if we're keeping it 100 and a buck, as we do on Soul Power Tennis, racism is a real thing and racism has something to do with it. We're not going to negate that. It has always been something to do with it. And at the present moment, it definitely has something to do with it. And that's a problem. Because if Africa is so big, such an untapped market to introduce or to make readily available the game of tennis, and so much money would be gained from that, so many resources, accolades would be gained from that, why hasn't it happened yet? So racism is definitely a part of it. So let's acknowledge that. However, we're going to save that conversation for another day. This particular broadcast is simply presenting the idea of the African Open Tennis Championships and what the possibility could be of that being an actual thing that comes into existence on the continent of Africa. So I gave you the rollout, presented the idea. This is not a new conversation. I've seen it touched on other tennis channels, and it seems to be becoming more a part of the conversation in tennis. And so I don't want to negate that. So I think that things are on track and the conversation is happening. The conversations are happening. And so things are moving forward. I'm just here to kind of nudge it along a bit further as a human being on planet Earth who loves tennis, as a black man, as a foundational black American man, and being of African descent in some way. I want to move things along. You know, I want it to happen a bit quicker. I want to see that. Some of my favorite players are players of African descent. My favorite player is not of direct African descent, but it's all good. The thing that I love about sports and that I love about tennis is that it is a universal matter. And so it forces you in a way to not be racist. It forces you in a way to acknowledge other people and other races or other ethnicities' humanity, their power, their potential. And when you see players from all over the world competing against each other or competing with each other, it's beautiful. It makes you feel like a human. It's like, man, this feels good to see us getting along and being one family as a human race, quote unquote. It feels good. And so I want to see more of that. And that's why I want more of that inclusion. Let's include all the people. So I'm just here to do my part to push the conversation along. And one day, in some way, I think that the African Open Tennis Championships will be a reality. And I ask you to do your part in making that become a reality. And if you're tuning into this broadcast, and if you're liking this video, and if you're subscribing to this channel, you are doing that. It's at least what you can do. It's at least what you can do. And so I thank you all for tuning in to this broadcast. I thank you all for your support and your contributions. And again, the goal is to get to 1,000 subscribers by year's end. This is one of 2 primary channels that I have and one of 3 altogether. The other one is called Osmosis the Compostist. That's my newer one. And my other channel is called The Compliment King! Exclamation mark at the end. Here, Akmo Sari, Soul Power Tennis is who we be. So thank you once again for tuning in. And until next time, make sure you stay tuned and make sure you stay in tune. All right? See you soon. Peace.